The year is 2003. In the sprawling glass towers of Arlington, Virginia, where defense contractors feast on the endless appetite of war, Elsinore Security Solutions stands as a monument to American power projection. The company's steel and glass headquarters reflects the Pentagon across the Potomac, its windows gleaming like armor in the harsh fluorescent light of a nation perpetually at war. Harold Elsinore built this empire with his bare hands and West Point discipline. His framed photograph dominates the executive boardroom, a silver-haired titan in desert camouflage, standing beside armored Humvees in the scorching heat of Fallujah. His weathered face tells the story of a man who understood that in the post-9/11 world, security had become America's most profitable export. But Harold is dead now. The official report, stamped with Pentagon seals and classified markings, speaks of an improvised explosive device en route Tampa, that deadly stretch of asphalt between Baghdad's green zone and the airport. The explosion that claimed Harold's convoy left nothing but twisted metal and sand-covered dog tags. His body was shipped home in a flag-draped coffin, accorded the honors of a fallen patriot. In the mahogany-paneled boardroom where Harold once commanded million-dollar contracts, his younger brother Claudius now sits in the executive chair. Claudius lacks Harold's military bearing but possesses something perhaps more valuable in Washington's corridors of power: the smooth charisma of a born politician. His tailored suits never show wrinkles, his smile never wavers, and his handshake seals deals worth billions in taxpayer dollars. The transformation happened with stunning speed. Within weeks of Harold's funeral, Claudius had consolidated control of Elsinore Security's operations across 3 continents. Government contracts flowed like water, no-bid deals for private security in Iraq, Afghanistan, and a dozen other hotspots where American interests demanded protection. The Pentagon brass, grieving Harold's loss, embraced Claudius as a worthy successor to the family legacy. But the most shocking development came not in the boardroom, but in the social pages of the Washington Post. Gertrude Elsinore, Harold's widow of 25 years, had remarried. The bride, resplendent in understated elegance, wore pearls that caught the camera flash like tears. The groom, Claudius, stood beside her with the satisfied expression of a man who had won more than just a wife. He had claimed a dynasty. Gertrude brought more than grief to this union. As a former CIA analyst specializing in Middle Eastern affairs, she possessed security clearances that opened doors even Harold's military connections couldn't breach. Her Rolodex contained the private numbers of senators, generals, and intelligence directors. In marrying her, Claudius hadn't just taken a wife, he had acquired a key to the highest levels of the national security apparatus. The wedding reception, held in the Elsinore estate's manicured gardens, resembled a shadow cabinet meeting more than a celebration. Under strings of elegant lights, defense contractors mingled with Pentagon officials, while Secret Service agents stood discreetly among the topiary. The champagne flowed, toasts were raised to Harold's memory, and business cards were exchanged with the practiced efficiency of Washington's military-industrial complex. Prince Hamlet Elsinore returned from West Point 3 days after the wedding, his dress blues crisp against the humid Virginia summer. At 25, he carried his father's granite jaw and steel-gray eyes. But where Harold had possessed unwavering certainty, Hamlet harbored a scholar's doubt. His military bearing couldn't quite conceal the intellectual restlessness that had driven him to pursue advanced degrees in international relations and military strategy. The black town car that collected him from Reagan National Airport wound through Arlington's traffic-clogged streets, past strip malls and defense contractor offices that sprouted like mushrooms after a rain. The driver, a former Marine named Marcellus who had served under Harold in the First Gulf War, caught Hamlet's eye in the rearview mirror. "Your father would be proud, sir," Marcellus said, his voice carrying the weight of shared loss. "Word is you graduated top of your class in tactical analysis." Hamlet stared out the bulletproof window at the suburban landscape scrolling past. "What good are tactics when the war itself makes no sense, Marcellus?" The family estate occupied 15 acres of prime Virginia real estate, its colonial facade concealing state-of-the-art security systems and reinforced safe rooms. Ancient oaks lined the circular driveway, their branches forming a canopy over the black sedans and military SUVs that seemed permanently parked in the visitor spaces. This was a house where classified conversations happened over breakfast, where secure phone lines connected dining rooms to situation rooms half a world away. Hamlet found his mother in Harold's study, a wood-paneled sanctuary lined with military histories and framed photographs of foreign deployments. Gertrude stood before a wall map of the Middle East, her manicured finger tracing supply routes through Iraq's dangerous Anbar province. She had traded her morning black for a navy suit that spoke of renewed purpose. "Hamlet," she said, turning with the practiced smile that had charmed intelligence committees and foreign ministers. "You look tired, darling. The flight from New York?" "The flight was fine, Mother. It's everything else that's exhausting." Hamlet's voice carried an edge that made Gertrude's smile falter. How quickly grief transforms into opportunity. Gertrude's composure never wavered, but her eyes hardened with the instincts of a woman who had survived 20 years in the intelligence community. "Your father built this company to serve our country. Claudius is ensuring that mission continues." Father's body was barely cold before Uncle Claudius warmed his chair. And his bed, apparently. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Gertrude moved to the window, her silhouette framed against the manicured gardens where security cameras tracked every movement. "Your father is dead, Hamlet. I am alive. This company is alive. The men and women serving under our protection in Iraq and Afghanistan depend on our continued strength." "Strength?" Hamlet's laugh carried no humor. "Is that what we're calling it? Father dies in a convenient explosion. Uncle Claudius inherits billions in defense contracts, and you provide the security clearances to make it all legal. How very patriotic." Gertrude turned, her face revealing the steel that had once analyzed enemy troop movements and terrorist financing networks. "Your father died serving his country. Don't dishonor his memory with conspiracy theories." Memory. Hamlet picked up a photograph from Harold's desk. Father and son at Hamlet's West Point graduation, both in dress uniform, both believing in something larger than themselves. "Tell me, Mother, what exactly are we supposed to remember? The man who built this company with honor, or the convenient accident that transferred his empire to more ambitious hands?" That evening, Claudius held court in the estate's secure conference room, a windowless chamber lined with lead and Faraday cage mesh to prevent electronic eavesdropping. The mahogany table bore the scars of countless classified briefings, its surface reflecting the glow of multiple secure laptops and encrypted satellite phones. Around the table sat the shadow government of America's private military complex, former generals turned corporate executives, ex-CIA directors, now serving as consultants, and Pentagon procurement officers whose signatures were worth more than small nations' GDP. Claudius commanded the room with effortless authority, his silver hair catching the harsh light of the overhead fluorescents. "Gentlemen, Operation Iraqi Freedom has created unprecedented opportunities for security contractors. Our embedded personnel are reporting increased insurgent activity along the Euphrates River corridor. I'm recommending we double our force protection details." General Morrison, a thick-set man whose chest displayed enough ribbons to outfit a marching band, leaned forward. "That means doubling our billing rates to the Pentagon." Harold was always cautious about appearing too eager for profit. "Harold is dead," Claudius said with the finality of a closing gavel. "And caution won't protect American personnel in Fallujah. We have a moral obligation to provide the best security money can buy." Hamlet watched from the doorway, invisible in his dark civilian clothes against the corridor's shadows. The conversation continued, numbers flowing like blood from an arterial wound. Billions in no-bid contracts, casualty insurance rates, hazard pay multipliers. The mathematics of war, reduced to quarterly profit projections. His father had built Elsinore Security to protect American personnel overseas, but this felt different. Harold's military precision had been replaced by Claudius's corporate ruthlessness. Where Harold saw duty, Claudius saw opportunity. Where Harold counted lives saved, Claudius calculated margins gained. After the meeting dissolved into handshakes and encrypted phone calls, Hamlet found himself alone in his father's study. The room still smelled of Harold's cologne, sandalwood and gunpowder, tradition and violence combined. Hamlet poured 3 fingers of his father's bourbon, the same Kentucky whiskey Harold had shared with him on his 18th birthday, explaining the weight of family legacy and national service. The secure phone rang at exactly midnight, its shrill tone cutting through the mansion's silence like an alarm. The caller ID showed only a string of encrypted numbers, but Hamlet recognized the protocol, a classified communication from overseas operations. He hesitated, then lifted the receiver. Hamlet. The voice was Harold's, unmistakable despite the static and digital compression of satellite encryption. My son. The bourbon glass slipped from Hamlet's nerveless fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor, in a spray of amber liquid and crystal fragments. Father? Listen carefully. My death was no accident. The IED was placed by someone with intimate knowledge of our convoy routes, someone with access to classified movement schedules, someone inside Elsinore Security. The room seemed to spin around Hamlet as he gripped the phone with both hands. This isn't possible. You're dead. I saw your coffin. Dead, yes, but not silenced. Claudius discovered I was investigating irregularities in our Iraqi contracts, weapons shipments that disappeared, security teams that existed only on paper, insurance claims filed for men who never died. When I threatened to report him to Congress, he had me eliminated. Uncle Claudius ordered your death? Your mother knows nothing. She believes the official reports, grieves genuinely for my loss, but Claudius, he has turned my company into a profiteering machine, feeding on America's fears while good soldiers die for his balance sheet. The line crackled with interference, Harold's voice fading in and out like a transmission from the edge of space. You must expose him, Hamlet. Use your military training, your security clearances, your access to classified communications. Gather proof of his crimes. But trust no one. Claudius has allies throughout the Pentagon and CIA. How can I be certain this is real? How do I know I'm not losing my mind? Check the Cayman accounts. Swiss bank routing numbers in my desk safe, behind the photograph of your mother. The codes are your birth date reversed. You'll find millions in payments that don't match any legitimate contracts. The line went dead, leaving only the soft hiss of encrypted static. Hamlet stood frozen in the study's sudden silence, the broken glass glittering at his feet like fragments of a shattered world. Outside the bulletproof windows, security lights swept the estate's perimeter in methodical patterns, but no light could penetrate the darkness now surrounding his family's legacy. He moved to Harold's desk with the mechanical precision of a soldier following orders. Behind his mother's wedding photograph, the safe's digital lock waited like a challenge. His birth date reversed. The 15th of August 2078 became 875180. The lock clicked open. Inside lay not just Swiss routing numbers, but photographs, grainy surveillance shots of weapons transfers, bank statements showing payments to shell corporations, and a handwritten note in Harold's familiar script. If you're reading this, then Claudius has already moved against me. Trust no one, avenge my death, restore our honor. Hamlet closed the safe with trembling hands. The weight of duty settled on his shoulders like the familiar burden of his West Point dress uniform. He was no longer just a son grieving his father. He was now a soldier with a mission, an intelligence officer with a target, and a prince sworn to restore justice to a corrupted kingdom. The war had come home. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Potomac, casting long shadows across the Pentagon's limestone facade. Inside the massive building's labyrinthine corridors, Colonel Polonius Laertes moved with the measured stride of a man who had spent 30 years navigating the military bureaucracy's treacherous currents. His dress uniform bore enough ribbons to tell the story of American conflicts from Panama to Kosovo, each decoration a testament to his ability to survive while others fell. Polonius served as the Pentagon's liaison to private military contractors, a position that required the delicate balance of a tightrope walker. Too much oversight and the defense contractors would complain to Congress about bureaucratic interference. Too little, and congressional committees would demand investigations into cost overruns and no-bid contracts. His office, tucked away in the Pentagon's D-ring, had become a confessional where corporate executives admitted their sins in exchange for absolution. His phone buzzed with an encrypted text message. Need to discuss Elsinore security irregularities. Classification level, eyes only. H.E. The sender's identification showed Hamlet Elsinore, recently graduated from West Point with highest honors in intelligence analysis. Polonius frowned at the message. Harold Elsinore's death had sent shockwaves through the defense establishment, but Claudius had quickly proven himself an even more reliable partner than his deceased brother. Elsinore Security's contracts had expanded exponentially under Claudius's leadership, providing essential services that kept American personnel alive in Iraq's increasingly dangerous environment. An hour later, Hamlet sat across from Polonius in a secure briefing room deep within the Pentagon's classified sections. The younger man had traded his civilian clothes for a crisp army dress uniform, his lieutenant's bars gleaming against dark fabric. Despite his youth, Hamlet carried himself with the disciplined bearing of a career officer. "Colonel, I appreciate you taking this meeting on short notice," Hamlet began, his voice carrying the formal precision of a military briefing. "I've been reviewing my father's files and discovered some concerning patterns in our Iraqi operations." Polonius activated the room's white noise generators and checked that the secure phone line showed no active connections. "What kind of patterns, Lieutenant?" Hamlet opened a leather briefcase and withdrew a manila folder marked with classification stamps. "Ghost employees, security personnel who exist on payroll but never deployed to theater. Insurance claims filed for casualties that don't match military casualty reports. Weapons shipments diverted from their intended destinations." "These are serious allegations," Polonius said, though his tone suggested more caution than surprise. "Your father never mentioned any irregularities to me. Are you certain these aren't simply accounting errors or classification issues?" "I've cross-referenced the data with Defense Department databases. The patterns are too consistent to be errors." Hamlet leaned forward, his gray eyes reflecting the overhead fluorescence like steel. "Colonel, someone is using American lives as a profit center. Ghost personnel inflate billing while real soldiers go without adequate protection." Polonius studied the documents with the practiced eye of a man who had seen every variety of military fraud. The numbers told a disturbing story: millions in payments that couldn't be traced to actual services, personnel records that existed only in Elsinore Security's internal databases, equipment purchases that never reached forward operating bases. "Lieutenant Elsinore, these documents suggest your uncle may be involved in significant financial irregularities. Are you prepared for the consequences of pursuing this investigation? My father died believing in honor and duty. If his death was connected to these irregularities, then I have an obligation to see justice done." Hamlet's voice carried the quiet intensity of a man who had already made peace with dangerous choices. "Very well. But this investigation must proceed through proper channels. Military justice moves slowly, but it moves thoroughly." Polonius gathered the documents and locked them in his desk safe. "I'll need time to verify these claims through independent sources. In the meantime, you should avoid discussing this with anyone, especially your family." "Understood, sir." As Hamlet left the Pentagon, he felt the weight of surveillance cameras tracking his movement through the building's security checkpoints. The marble corridors seemed to whisper with secrets, and every uniform seemed to hide potential enemies. His father's voice echoed in his memory: "Trust no one." The drive back to Arlington took him through Virginia's sprawling suburbs, past strip malls and chain restaurants that served the massive population of defense contractors, intelligence analysts, and military personnel who kept America's war machine running. Radio news reports crackled with updates from Iraq, another bombing in Baghdad, casualty reports from Fallujah, congressional debates over supplemental war funding. His secure cell phone rang as he navigated the Beltway's perpetual traffic jam. The caller ID showed his college roommate from West Point, Rosencrantz Miller, now serving as an intelligence officer stationed at Fort Belvoir. "Hamlet, heard you were back in town. Guildenstern and I are meeting for drinks at that place in Crystal City. You should join us. We can swap war stories and complain about officer pay." The invitation felt innocent enough, but Hamlet's newfound paranoia made him wonder if his old friends might be fishing for information. Still, he needed allies, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern had known him before his world collapsed into shadows and suspicion. "I'll be there," Hamlet replied, though he made a mental note to say nothing about his investigation. In this new world where his father's ghost spoke through encrypted phone lines and his uncle might be a murderer, even friendship had become another battlefield where trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. The Crystal City Bar occupied the basement level of an anonymous office building, its brick walls lined with memorabilia from America's recent conflicts, Desert Storm patches, Kosovo deployment photos, and faded newspaper headlines celebrating victories that now seemed like distant history. The clientele consisted primarily of off-duty military personnel and defense contractors, their conversations conducted in the coded language of classified operations and security clearances. Hamlet found Rosencrantz and Guildenstern at a corner table, their civilian clothes failing to disguise the rigid posture that West Point had drilled into their spines. Both men had traded their gray cadet uniforms for the dark suits of intelligence professionals, their boyish faces now bearing the weathered look of officers who had seen classified briefings and classified failures in equal measure. "The prodigal prince returns," Guildenstern said, raising his beer in a mock toast. His smile carried the easy camaraderie of shared academy experiences, but his eyes held the calculating assessment of a trained intelligence officer. "Word is you've been keeping busy since graduation. Advanced degrees, language training, tactical analysis courses." "Staying sharp," Hamlet replied, accepting the beer that Rosencrantz slid across the scarred wooden table. "What about you two? Still pushing papers at Belvoir, or have they finally given you real work?" Rosencrantz laughed, but the sound carried no genuine humor. "You know we can't discuss operational details. Let's just say the intelligence community values West Point graduates who understand the intersection of military strategy and economic policy." The conversation felt choreographed, each question designed to elicit specific information. Hamlet recognized the techniques from his own intelligence training, building rapport, establishing trust, gradually steering the discussion toward desired topics. His paranoia sharpened like a blade being whetted. "Heard about your father," Guildenstern said, his voice adopting the practiced solemnity of a professional condolence. "Hell of a loss for the defense community. Harold Elsinore was a legend, built Elsinore Security from nothing into one of the most respected contractors in theater." "Respected," Hamlet repeated, testing the word like it might explode. "Interesting choice of terminology. What do you hear about our operations in Iraq?" "Standard stuff," Rosencrantz replied, but his eyes flickered with something that might have been nervousness. "Force protection details, convoy security, facility hardening. Your uncle's doing a good job maintaining operational tempo." Operational tempo. Hamlet leaned back in his chair, studying his former roommates with new eyes. "You seem remarkably well informed about private contractor activities for intelligence officers stationed in Virginia." The silence stretched between them like a tripwire. Around the bar, other conversations continued, discussions of deployment rotations, family separations, and the endless bureaucracy of military life. But at their corner table, the three West Point graduates measured each other with the careful assessment of poker players holding cards they couldn't reveal. "We keep tabs on major contractors," Guildenstern said finally. "Situational awareness. Your family's company handles a lot of sensitive operations." "Sensitive operations." Hamlet repeated the phrase again, noting how his friends seemed to speak in official euphemisms. "Like what, specifically?" "Come on, Hamlet," Rosencrantz said, his facade of friendship beginning to crack. "You know we can't discuss classified contractor relationships. We're just saying your uncle seems to have things well in hand." Hamlet stood abruptly, leaving his beer half-finished on the table. "Well in hand? Yes, I imagine he does. Tell me, are you here as friends concerned about my well-being, or as intelligence officers gathering information about potential security risks?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an IED explosion. Guildenstern's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket, the unconscious gesture of a man accustomed to carrying concealed weapons. Rosencrantz simply stared at Hamlet with the flat expression of an interrogator whose cover had been blown. "We're here because people are concerned about you," Rosencrantz said, his voice now stripped of pretense. "Losing a parent is traumatic. Sometimes grief manifests as paranoia, conspiracy theories, unfounded suspicions about people who care about you. People like my uncle? People like your family, your father's business partners, your friends from the academy." Guildenstern leaned forward, his tone taking on the urgent quality of a handler trying to maintain control of an asset. "There are rumors you've been asking questions, reviewing files, making inquiries that could be misinterpreted." Hamlet felt the familiar weight of his service pistol against his ribs, concealed beneath his jacket. The bar's ambient noise, clinking glasses, muted conversations, classic rock playing from hidden speakers seemed to fade as his training kicked in. He was surrounded by potential hostiles, his escape routes limited, his operational security thoroughly compromised. "Misinterpreted by whom?" he asked quietly. "By people who matter," Guildenstern replied. "People who determine security clearances, assign duty stations, approve promotion boards. People who understand that national security sometimes requires difficult choices. The threat was delivered with the professional courtesy of military officers, but its meaning was unmistakable. Hamlet's investigation had already attracted attention from forces beyond his uncle's immediate influence. The tentacles of whatever conspiracy had killed his father reached deep into the intelligence community, the Pentagon, and perhaps even the halls of Congress. "I appreciate your concern," Hamlet said, his voice carrying the formal politeness of a diplomatic protest, "but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own grief." He turned and walked toward the exit, conscious of their eyes tracking his movement. At the door, he paused and looked back at his former friends, now revealed as surveillance assets tasked with managing a potential security risk. "Send my regards to whoever sent you," he said, "and tell them that some questions deserve answers, regardless of the consequences." The Virginia night air felt clean after the bar's stale atmosphere, but Hamlet knew he was walking into a larger trap with every step. His secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown sender. "They know you're investigating. Meet me at the Lincoln Memorial, midnight. Come alone. A friend of your father's." The Lincoln Memorial stood like a marble temple against the Washington night, its columns illuminated by harsh security floodlights that cast long shadows across the reflecting pool. At midnight, the tourist crowds had long since dispersed, leaving only the homeless veterans who sheltered in the memorial's periphery and the Secret Service agents who maintained their invisible perimeter around the nation's monuments. Hamlet approached the memorial's steps with the tactical awareness of his military training, scanning for potential ambush positions among the surrounding trees and monuments. His service pistol pressed against his ribs beneath his jacket, and his secure phone was set to emergency broadcast mode if something happened to him. His location and final communications would automatically transmit to a predetermined list of recipients. The figure waiting at Lincoln's feet wore the rumpled suit of a career bureaucrat, but his bearing suggested military background. As Hamlet climbed the marble steps, the man's face emerged from shadow-weathered features, steel-gray hair, and eyes that held the thousand-yard stare of someone who had seen classified horrors. "Lieutenant Elsinore," the man said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of a briefing officer. "I'm Robert Horatio, former CIA station chief in Baghdad. I served with your father during the First Gulf War, before he went private sector." Hamlet kept his distance, his hand positioned for a quick draw if necessary. "How do I know you're who you claim to be?" Horatio reached slowly into his jacket and withdrew a photograph Harold Elsinore in desert camouflage, standing beside a younger Horatio in front of a bombed-out Iraqi bunker. The image bore the faded quality of film photography from the 1990 seconds before digital cameras became standard military equipment. "Your father saved my life during the Highway of Death engagement," Horatio said, returning the photograph to his jacket. "I owe him a debt that extends beyond the grave." "What do you know about his death?" Horatio gestured toward a marble bench positioned between Lincoln's towering figure and the memorial's edge. They sat with the practiced spacing of intelligence operatives close enough for conversation, far enough apart to react to threats. Below them, the reflecting pool stretched toward the Washington Monument, its surface broken by the gentle ripples of the memorial's fountains. "Your father contacted me 3 weeks before his death," Horatio began, his voice barely above a whisper. "He discovered irregularities in Elsinore, security's Iraqi operations, ghost personnel, diverted weapons shipments, insurance fraud. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized the corruption extended beyond his company." "How deep?" "Pentagon procurement officers taking kickbacks, CIA operatives facilitating black market arms sales, congressional staffers receiving payments through shell companies. Your father stumbled onto a network that was using the Iraq War as a personal ATM machine." Hamlet felt his training take over, cataloging details and cross-referencing them against his own discoveries. Who was running it? That's where it gets complicated. Horatio pulled out a pack of cigarettes, lighting one with the nervous gesture of a man under constant stress. "Your uncle Claudius wasn't the architect. He was recruited by people with deeper connections. Defense Department officials, intelligence community veterans, private contractors who'd been feeding at the government trough since the Cold War ended. Names: Admiral Richardson from Defense Logistics Agency, Senator Morrison from the Armed Services Committee, Deputy Director Franklin from CIA Operations. They needed someone inside Elsinore Security to facilitate their operations, and Claudius fit their requirements perfectly. The smoke from Horatio's cigarette drifted across Lincoln's marble face, creating ghostly patterns in the floodlight glare. Around them, Washington's monuments stood like sentinels guarding secrets that would never see daylight, their stone faces bearing witness to conversations that could topple governments. When Harold threatened to expose them, they eliminated him. Horatio continued. The IED wasn't placed by Iraqi insurgents. It was planted by American operatives using military-grade explosives and insider intelligence about convoy routes. Can you prove any of this? Horatio crushed his cigarette against the marble bench, the ember dying like a falling star. Your father was gathering evidence, but he died before he could complete his investigation. However, he did leave something behind: a Swiss bank account containing digital files that document the entire conspiracy. I found Swiss routing numbers in his safe. Then you're halfway there. The account requires dual authentication, your father's access codes, and biometric verification from a blood relative. The files contain enough evidence to bring down the entire network, but accessing them will make you the most wanted man in Washington. Hamlet stared up at Lincoln's weathered face, thinking of the president who had preserved the Union through civil war, who had made impossible decisions for the greater good. The weight of his father's legacy pressed down on him like the marble itself, crushing and immovable. If I access those files, what happens next? You become a target, Horatio said with brutal honesty. These people have killed before, and they won't hesitate to kill again. Your military training will help, but you'll be fighting an enemy that controls intelligence networks, military resources, and government institutions. And if I don't? Your father's death becomes just another casualty of war. Your uncle continues profiting from American blood, and the corruption spreads until it consumes everything your father built. Horatio stood and buttoned his rumpled jacket against the night chill. I can provide you with resources, secure communication networks, safe houses, allies within the intelligence community who still believe in honor. But the decision to proceed must be yours alone. He handed Hamlet a secure smartphone, its screen displaying only a single encrypted contact number. When you're ready to access those Swiss files, call that number. We'll arrange secure transportation and technical support. But once you cross that line, there's no going back. Hamlet watched Horatio disappear into the shadows surrounding the memorial, his footsteps echoing off marble until they faded into the ambient noise of Washington's restless night. Alone with Lincoln's silent judgment, Hamlet weighed his options with the analytical precision of a West Point-trained officer conducting mission planning. The evidence was compelling but circumstantial. The risks were enormous but necessary. His father's voice echoed from their final encrypted conversation. Use your training, gather proof, restore our honor. Hamlet descended the memorial steps with the measured pace of a soldier reporting for duty. The war for his family's soul and perhaps America's was about to begin. 3 days after the Lincoln Memorial meeting, Hamlet found himself in a nondescript office building in McLean, Virginia, surrounded by the sterile efficiency of a CIA front company. The facility masqueraded as a consulting firm specializing in international risk assessment, but the bulletproof windows and sophisticated electronic countermeasures revealed its true purpose. Horatio had arranged the meeting through encrypted channels, using authentication codes that dated back to Harold's intelligence connections from the 1990 seconds. The Swiss bank account access required a combination of digital keys and biometric verification that could only be performed at a secure facility with satellite uplinks to European financial networks. Hamlet sat before a bank of computer monitors while a technician named Bernardo prepared the quantum-encrypted connection to Credit Suisse's classified servers in Zurich. Your father was paranoid about operational security, Bernardo explained, his fingers dancing across keyboards that controlled communication arrays worth more than most people's houses. The files are stored on servers that require simultaneous authentication from 3 locations, Zurich, Georgetown, and a mobile satellite uplink. If any component fails, the data self-destructs. Hamlet placed his thumb on the biometric scanner while entering Harold's access codes. The numbers his father had used were significant: the date of Hamlet's birth, his West Point cadet number, and the coordinates of Harold's first combat mission in Iraq. Each digit represented a connection between father and son that transcended death itself. The screen flickered with Swiss banking protocols, layers of encryption peeling away like digital onion skin. When the files finally opened, Hamlet found himself staring at a catalog of American betrayal that made his stomach turn. Harold had meticulously documented every transaction, every kickback, every death that had generated profit for the conspiracy. Ghost employees generated $50 million in fraudulent payroll charges, while real soldiers went without body armor. Weapons shipments intended for Iraqi police disappeared into black market networks controlled by American operatives. Insurance claims for fabricated casualties created paper trails that led directly to congressional appropriations committees. But the most damning evidence involved Claudius directly. Harold's files contained audio recordings of phone conversations where his brother discussed eliminating problematic personnel who asked too many questions. Bank records showed payments to former Special Forces operatives who specialized in plausible deniability solutions for sensitive problems. "Jesus Christ," Bernardo whispered, reading over Hamlet's shoulder. "Your uncle ordered hits on American personnel who got too close to the truth." The audio files painted an even darker picture. Claudius's voice, unmistakable despite the digital distortion, discussed Harold's growing suspicions with the cold calculation of a corporate executive planning a hostile takeover. "Harold's becoming a liability," Claudius said in one recording. "His moral flexibility has always been limited. If he proceeds with his investigation, he'll bring down the entire network. We need to consider permanent solutions." Another voice, which Harold's notes identified as Admiral Richardson, responded with military precision. "Operational accident in theater. IED attack on convoy. No American fingerprints. Plausible deniability maintained. Can your people arrange the necessary logistics?" "My people can arrange anything," Claudius replied. "For the right price." Hamlet's hands shook as he scrolled through months of similar conversations. His uncle hadn't just stolen Harold's company, he had murdered his own brother to protect a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American government. The brotherhood that Harold had believed in, the military honor that had defined the Elsinore family for generations, had been corrupted into a profit-maximizing machine that consumed American lives like raw materials. The final file contained Harold's video testimony, recorded just days before his death. Harold appeared gaunt and exhausted, his military bearing diminished by the weight of what he had discovered. He sat in what appeared to be a secure room, his voice carrying the formal precision of a man delivering his final report. "If you're watching this, Hamlet, then they succeeded in eliminating me," Harold began, his gray eyes staring directly into the camera with the intensity of a final briefing. "What I've discovered goes beyond simple fraud or war profiteering. This is systematic betrayal of everything we swore to defend." Harold's image flickered as the satellite connection struggled with the encrypted data stream. "Claudius is working with a network that includes Pentagon officials, CIA operatives, and congressional committee members. They're using American military operations as cover for arms trafficking, drug smuggling, and currency manipulation schemes that generate billions in untraceable profits. The evidence in these files will destroy them, but only if it reaches the right people. Senator McCain's office has investigators who can't be bought. The Inspector General's office has prosecutors who still believe in military justice, but you'll need protection these people have killed to protect their secrets, and they won't hesitate to kill again." Harold leaned forward, his face filling the screen with the intensity of a father's final words to his son. "I failed to stop them while I was alive. Don't let my death be meaningless. Use your training, trust your instincts, and remember that honor is worth more than life itself." The video ended, leaving Hamlet alone with evidence that could topple governments or cost him his life. Around him, the secure facility's electronic systems hummed with the constant vigilance of intelligence operations, monitoring threats from enemies foreign and domestic. Bernardo broke the silence with the professional assessment of an intelligence analyst. "This is enough to trigger congressional investigations, military tribunals, and federal prosecutions. But releasing it will make you enemy number one for some very dangerous people." Hamlet stared at the computer screens displaying his father's legacy, years of careful investigation reduced to digital files that represented both justice and suicide. The decision before him carried the weight of his military oath, his family honor, and his father's final command. He thought of Claudius sitting in Harold's chair, profiting from American deaths while wearing the mask of patriotic service. He thought of Gertrude, unknowingly married to her husband's killer. He thought of the soldiers dying in Iraq, while their protectors sold their equipment to the highest bidder. Copy everything to multiple secure servers. Hamlet ordered, his voice carrying the authority of command decision. Then contact Senator McCain's office. It's time to honor the dead by serving justice to the living. The Elsinore estate's security system was a marvel of post-9/11 paranoia motion sensors, thermal imaging cameras, and electromagnetic pulse detectors that could identify hostile surveillance equipment from 300 yards away. But Hamlet knew every blind spot, every maintenance access point, every override code that Harold had shared with him during their father-son discussions about operational security. 2 weeks after accessing his father's Swiss files, Hamlet had developed a plan worthy of his intelligence training. If Claudius was truly guilty of Harold's murder, he would need to be provoked into revealing himself. The evidence from Switzerland was damning, but circumstantial audio recordings could be dismissed as fabricated. Financial records could be explained as accounting errors. What Hamlet needed was real-time confirmation of his uncle's treachery. The plan required Ophelia's unwitting assistance. Colonel Polonius's daughter had returned from her deployment as a military intelligence officer in Afghanistan, her security clearances intact and her access to classified databases unquestioned. More importantly, she had been Harold's protégé, trained in the same analytical techniques that had made him one of the Defense Department's most trusted contractors. Hamlet found Ophelia in the estate's Secure Communications Center, a Faraday cage-protected room where encrypted satellite calls could be conducted without fear of electronic eavesdropping. She wore the crisp uniform of an Army intelligence officer, her blonde hair pulled back in regulation style. Her blue eyes reflecting the glow of multiple computer monitors displaying classified data streams from various Middle Eastern hotspots. "Hamlet," she said, looking up from a tactical assessment report marked with multiple classification stamps. "I heard you were asking questions about Iraqi operations. Dad's concerned you might be putting yourself at risk." "Your father's always been protective," Hamlet replied, settling into a chair beside her workstation. "But some questions need to be asked, regardless of the risks. How well did you know my father's operational methods?" Ophelia's expression shifted subtly, her training evident in the way she processed his question for potential security implications. Harold was meticulous about documentation, obsessive about operational security. "He taught me that successful intelligence operations require patient accumulation of evidence, careful analysis, and precise timing. He also taught you about deception detection, didn't he? How to identify when supposedly friendly assets might be working against American interests." "Of course." Ophelia's voice carried the confidence of an officer trained in counterintelligence techniques. "Why do you ask?" Hamlet leaned forward, his voice dropping to the conspiratorial whisper, appropriate for classified discussions. "I've been reviewing Dad's files and discovered some concerning patterns. Ghost employees, diverted weapons, shipments, insurance fraud. But I think there's more. Someone inside Elsinore Security was providing operational intelligence to hostile forces." Ophelia's professional demeanor sharpened like a blade being honed. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence?" "Circumstantial evidence. But I have an idea for gathering definitive proof." Hamlet activated the room's white noise generators and checked that all recording devices were disabled. "I need your help with a technical operation that requires your security clearances and database access." "What kind of operation?" Hamlet withdrew a classified folder marked with National Security Agency stamps. "I want to create a false intelligence report indicating that a surviving member of Dad's convoy is willing to testify about the circumstances of his death. The report should suggest this survivor has evidence proving the IED was placed by American operatives rather than Iraqi insurgents." Ophelia studied the folder with the analytical intensity of a trained intelligence officer. "You're talking about creating fabricated classified material. That's a federal crime, Hamlet. Court-martial, prison time, complete destruction of career prospects. Only if we get caught, and only if the report is actually false." Hamlet met her gaze with the steady intensity of a man whose worldview had been shattered and rebuilt around a single truth. What if there really is a survivor? What if someone did witness Dad's murder and has been hiding in fear of his life? Then that would be the most significant intelligence breakthrough since the war began, Ophelia said quietly. But creating false classified documents to flush out potential traitors is exactly the kind of operation that destroys careers and ruins lives. My career is already ruined. My life is already destroyed. The only question is whether Dad's death will be avenged or covered up by people who profit from American blood. Ophelia stared at the classification stamps, weighing her professional obligations against her personal loyalty to Harold's memory. She had loved the old soldier like a second father, had learned her craft from his patient instruction, had believed in the mission he represented. If Harold had truly been murdered by American traitors, then every principle he had taught her demanded justice. How would we disseminate this false report? Through normal intelligence channels, but with restricted distribution. Only a handful of people would receive it: Uncle Claudius, Admiral Richardson, Senator Morrison's staff, and Deputy Director Franklin. We monitor their communications afterward and see who panics. And if they don't react? Then I'm a paranoid son consumed by grief, and you're an intelligence officer who made a career-ending mistake. But if they do react? Hamlet's voice carried the cold satisfaction of a hunter setting the perfect trap. Ophelia activated her workstation and began accessing the classified databases that would allow her to create convincing fabricated intelligence. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent months analyzing enemy communications and friendly force capabilities. "We'll need to make this look authentic," she said, her professional training overriding her personal reservations. "Real unit designations, plausible timeline, believable witness identification. If anyone runs a background check on our fictional survivor, the cover story needs to hold up under scrutiny. How long will it take?" 6 hours to create the documents, another 12 to introduce them into the distribution system without triggering security protocols. But Hamlet. Ophelia paused, her hands hovering over the keyboard. "Once we do this, there's no going back. We'll either prove your uncle's guilt or destroy our own lives trying. My father's ghost won't let me rest until justice is served," Hamlet replied, activating the recording equipment concealed within his jacket. Every conversation from this point forward would be preserved as evidence, insurance against the possibility that his own death might be required to expose the truth. Outside the communications center's reinforced walls, the Elsinore estate maintained its facade of patriotic respectability. But inside the Faraday cage where secrets were born and died, two intelligence officers prepared to wage war against the very system they had sworn to protect. The trap was being set. Soon, Claudius would reveal whether he was a grieving brother or a calculating murderer. The fabricated intelligence report entered the classified distribution system at 0600 hours, its digital fingerprints indistinguishable from authentic NSA communications. Hamlet and Ophelia monitored its progress from the estate's communications center, watching as the document propagated through secure military networks like a virus designed to expose infection. By 0800, the report had reached its intended targets. The classification header read, "Eyes only. Potential witness to Elsinore convoy attack available for debriefing." The fabricated content described a wounded Iraqi interpreter who claimed to have witnessed American operatives planting the IED that killed Harold's convoy, now hiding in a safe house in Tikrit and willing to testify in exchange for asylum. The response was immediate and damning. Admiral Richardson's office initiated emergency secure communications with Deputy Director Franklin within 30 minutes of receiving the report. Hamlet's surveillance equipment, borrowed from Horatio's CIA contacts, intercepted fragments of their encrypted conversation through signals intelligence techniques that technically violated federal law, but served justice in ways that federal law apparently couldn't. "The witness is a problem." Richardson's voice crackled through the static of quantum encryption. "If he reaches congressional investigators, the entire operation unravels." "Agreed," Franklin replied, his tone carrying the bureaucratic precision of a career intelligence official. "We need to implement damage control protocols before this reaches the oversight committees." But it was Claudius's reaction that provided the definitive proof Hamlet needed. Within 2 hours of receiving the intelligence report, His uncle initiated a secure video conference with an unknown party, conducted from the estate's most secure communication facility. Hamlet's hidden cameras captured every word, every gesture, every revelation. Claudius appeared on screen wearing the casual clothes of a man conducting business from home, but his expression carried the deadly focus of a military commander responding to enemy action. The person on the other end of the call remained invisible, but their voice suggested special operations background clipped, precise, professional. The Iraqi interpreter needs to disappear, Claudius said without preamble. Permanently. No interrogation, no testimony, no congressional hearings that could expose our financial arrangements. That's going to be expensive, the unseen operative replied. Tikrit is hostile territory, American personnel are high-value targets, and eliminating a protected witness will require significant resources. Money is not an issue. The Iraqi operation generates $50 million per quarter in off-the-books revenue. Protecting that income stream justifies any operational expense. Hamlet watched his uncle's face through the hidden camera's lens, seeing not grief for Harold's death but cold calculation about protecting profits built on American graves. Claudius displayed no remorse, no hesitation, no human emotion beyond the predator's instinct to eliminate threats. "What about the son?" the operative asked. Intelligence reports suggest Lieutenant Elsinore has been asking questions, reviewing classified files, meeting with potential allies. Claudius paused, and for a moment, his mask slipped entirely. Hamlet is emotionally compromised by his father's death. Grief manifests as paranoia, conspiracy theories, unfounded suspicions about family members. If his behavior becomes too problematic, we can arrange psychiatric evaluation, medical leave, perhaps even involuntary commitment. And if psychiatric solutions prove insufficient, then we implement permanent solutions, Claudius replied with the emotional detachment of a man ordering office supplies. Harold trained his son well, too well, perhaps. Military intelligence officers who ask inconvenient questions sometimes suffer unfortunate accidents during training exercises. The call ended, leaving Hamlet staring at recorded evidence of his uncle's complete moral bankruptcy. Claudius hadn't just murdered Harold, he was prepared to kill his own nephew to protect a criminal empire built on war, profiteering, and American blood. Ophelia sat beside him in stunned silence, her professional training struggling to process the enormity of what they had witnessed. "He's planning to have you killed," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the communication center's electronic humming. "Yes," Hamlet replied, his voice carrying the flat calm of a soldier who had accepted the tactical situation. "But now we have proof. Audio recordings, video surveillance, financial records, witness testimony, everything needed to destroy him and his entire network. What's our next move?" Hamlet activated the secure satellite uplink that would transmit the evidence to Horatio's CIA contacts, Senator McCain's congressional investigators, and the military justice system that still believed in prosecuting American traitors. "We go public. Full disclosure, complete transparency. Let the chips fall where they may. They'll kill us before the evidence reaches the right people." "Probably," Hamlet agreed, checking his service pistol and ensuring that backup copies of all evidence were stored in multiple secure locations. "But Dad didn't train me to survive, he trained me to complete the mission." The estate's security alarms began wailing as Hamlet transmitted the final evidence packages, their electronic shriek announcing that the war for America's soul had entered its final phase. Through the communications center's bulletproof windows, he could see black SUVs racing up the circular driveway, their occupants preparing to eliminate the last threat to their profitable conspiracy. Hamlet kissed Ophelia's forehead with the gentle finality of a soldier saying goodbye before a suicide mission. "Tell the world who killed Harold Elsinore," he said, handing her the secure communication device that would continue transmitting evidence even after his death. "And tell my mother that her husband's killer has been sleeping in her bed." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the estate's marble corridors like the drumbeat of approaching justice. Hamlet checked his weapon one final time and prepared to honor his father's memory with his own blood, if necessary. The trap had worked perfectly. Now came the reckoning. The black SUVs disgorged their occupants like military transports delivering soldiers to a hot landing zone. 12 operatives in tactical gear moved with the coordinated precision of special operations veterans, their movements synchronized by encrypted radio communications and shared combat experience. They wore no unit patches, carried no identification, and left no digital fingerprints ghosts, serving a conspiracy that officially didn't exist. Hamlet watched their approach from the communications center's reinforced observation window, his military training automatically cataloging their equipment and tactics. HK-416 assault rifles with suppressors, night vision goggles, breaching charges capable of reducing reinforced doors to splinters. These weren't Pentagon bureaucrats or CIA desk jockeys, these were the kind of operators who eliminated problems too sensitive for official channels. The evidence transmission completed just as the first breaching charge detonated against the estate's main entrance. Hamlet's final message to Senator McCain's office included Harold's complete Swiss files, Claudius's recorded confession, and detailed financial records documenting the entire conspiracy. Even if Hamlet died in the next few minutes, the truth would survive to destroy his father's killers. "They're coming through the main floor," Ophelia reported, monitoring the estate's security cameras from her workstation. Her training as a military intelligence officer had prepared her for combat situations, but analyzing enemy movements from overhead satellite imagery was different from watching armed operatives storm through her childhood surrogate home. Hamlet activated the communications center's emergency lockdown protocols, sealing the reinforced doors and activating electromagnetic pulse shields that would protect their equipment from hostile electronic warfare. The room became a fortress within a fortress, its walls lined with enough classified material to trigger congressional investigations if it ever saw daylight. "How long can we hold them?" Ophelia asked, checking her service pistol with the mechanical precision of an officer preparing for close-quarters battle. "Long enough," Hamlet replied, though his tactical assessment suggested they had perhaps 15 minutes before the operatives breached their defenses. "The evidence is already in motion. Our job now is to survive long enough to testify at the congressional hearings." The secure phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for family communications. Hamlet hesitated, then answered to hear his mother's voice, strained with confusion and growing fear. "Hamlet, where are you? Claudius is shouting about national security threats and operational security breaches. There are armed men searching the house, going through Harold's papers. What's happening?" "Mother, listen carefully," Hamlet said, his voice carrying the urgent precision of a tactical briefing. "Everything Uncle Claudius told you about Dad's death was a lie. The IED wasn't placed by Iraqi insurgents, it was planted by American operatives working for Claudius and his Pentagon allies." The silence on the line stretched like a tripwire about to snap. When Gertrude finally spoke, her voice carried the hollow shock of a woman whose world had just collapsed. "That's impossible. Claudius loved Harold. They were brothers, business partners. He grieved at the funeral, held me when I cried, promised to honor Harold's memory. He murdered Dad to steal his company and protect a war profiteering conspiracy worth billions of dollars. I have recorded evidence audio of Claudius ordering Dad's assassination, financial records showing payments to the operatives who planted the bomb, video testimony from Dad himself documenting the entire network." "You're sick," Gertrude whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Grief has made you paranoid, delusional. You're seeing conspiracies where there are only coincidences. Then explain the armed men searching our house. Explain why Claudius needs to silence his own nephew. Explain why the Pentagon is treating a family disagreement as a national security crisis." The sound of approaching bootfalls echoed through the communications center's reinforced walls as the operatives located their target. Hamlet could hear suppressed weapons firing, electronic locks being bypassed, and the methodical progression of a well-planned assault. "Mother, I love you," Hamlet said, knowing this might be their final conversation. "But the man you married killed your first husband. When this is over, when the congressional investigations begin, remember that Dad died trying to protect American soldiers from the people who were supposed to be protecting them. He terminated the call as the first breaching charge detonated against the communications center's outer door. The reinforced steel held, but stress fractures appeared in the frame like lightning bolts frozen in metal. The operatives would need perhaps 3 more charges to breach their defenses." Ophelia positioned herself behind an overturned desk, her service weapon trained on the door with the steady aim of an officer who had qualified expert on the Army's combat pistol course. Any last words for posterity? Hamlet activated the emergency broadcast system that would transmit their final testimony to every major news network simultaneously. If they died in this room, their deaths would be witnessed by millions of Americans who deserve to know the truth about their government's secret wars. My name is Lieutenant Hamlet Elsinore, United States Army Intelligence. My father Harold was murdered by his brother Claudius, and a conspiracy of Pentagon officials, CIA operatives, and congressional staff members who are using the Iraq War to generate billions in illegal profits. The evidence has been transmitted to Senator McCain's office and will be released regardless of what happens to me. The second breaching charge exploded, and the door's frame began to buckle. Through the widening gap, Hamlet could see tactical lights and weapon muzzles positioning for final assault. If you're watching this, he continued, remember that some oaths are worth dying for, some truths are worth any sacrifice, and some honor can only be preserved through blood. The final charge detonated, and the communications center's defenses crumbled like the walls of a medieval castle under artillery bombardment. The last thing Hamlet saw before the tactical lights blinded him was his father's photograph on the wall. Harold's steady gaze, seeming to offer final approval for a mission completed with honor intact. The tactical lights carved through the smoke and debris like spotlights, revealing a theater of war. Hamlet raised his hands slowly, his service weapon visible but non-threatening as 12 laser sights painted red dots across his chest with the precision of military executioners. The lead operative moved with the fluid grace of Special Forces training, his face concealed behind night vision goggles that transformed him into a mechanical avatar of government-sanctioned violence. Lieutenant Elsinore, the operative said, his voice distorted by electronic communication equipment. You are under arrest for violation of the Espionage Act, unauthorized disclosure of classified material, and conspiracy to commit treason against the United States. Interesting charges, Hamlet replied, his voice carrying the calm precision of an intelligence officer conducting a debriefing under duress. Particularly coming from men who just conducted an unlawful assault on American citizens on domestic soil without judicial warrants or constitutional authority. The operative's weapon remained trained on Hamlet's center mass, but his posture suggested professional respect for a fellow soldier who faced death with dignity and tact. You transmitted classified documents to unauthorized recipients. That constitutes a federal crime regardless of the content or your motivations. I transmitted evidence of war crimes, murder, and treason to duly authorized congressional investigators. That constitutes my sworn duty as an officer of the United States Army. Behind the lead operative, Hamlet could see additional figures moving through the estate's damaged corridors. Claudius appeared in the doorway, his civilian clothes incongruous among the tactical gear, his face displaying the satisfied expression of a man who had successfully eliminated a business problem. Hamlet, Claudius said, his voice carrying false paternal concern. You've forced us into a very difficult situation. The material you transmitted contains operational details that could compromise ongoing intelligence activities and endanger American personnel overseas. The only Americans in danger are the ones you've been murdering to protect your profits, Hamlet replied, noting that Ophelia had positioned herself to cover his flanks while maintaining non-threatening posture. Her intelligence training was evident in the way she analyzed the tactical situation for potential escape routes or defensive advantages. Claudius stepped into the communications center, surveying the classified equipment with the calculating gaze of a businessman assessing valuable assets. Your father suffered from similar delusions toward the end. Harold began seeing conspiracies everywhere, imagining enemies among his closest allies, threatening to destroy everything we built together. Everything you built on American graves. Everything we built to protect American interests in an increasingly dangerous world, Claudius corrected, his tone taking on the rehearsed cadence of congressional testimony. Private military contractors provide essential services that allow our government to maintain global commitments without the political costs of official military deployment. Through the communications center's damaged walls, Hamlet could hear additional vehicles arriving outside. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, suggesting that this operation had expanded beyond simple arrest and detention. Whatever evidence he had transmitted was already generating responses throughout Washington's national security apparatus. The secure phone rang with the priority tone reserved for emergency communications from the Pentagon. The lead operative answered, his conversation conducted in the coded language of classified operations. Roger that. Control. Assets secured, facility contained, evidence transmission confirmed intercepted by NSA countermeasures. Awaiting instructions for final disposition. Final disposition, Hamlet repeated, recognizing the euphemism from his intelligence training. You mean execution? Murder disguised as operational necessity. We mean whatever is required to protect national security, Claudius said, but his eyes revealed the truth. Harold's investigation had threatened not just financial fraud but a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. Eliminating witnesses was simply another cost of doing business. The operative's radio crackled with additional communications. Control, be advised, we have congressional inquiries beginning to surface. Senator McCain's office is demanding immediate briefings on Elsinore security operations. Media outlets are preparing to broadcast intercepted evidence. Claudius's confident expression faltered as he realized the scope of Hamlet's final gambit. The evidence transmission hadn't been intercepted, it had reached its intended targets and was already spreading through channels beyond the conspiracy's control. Congressional investigators, military prosecutors, and journalists were beginning to examine Harold's files with the intensity of bloodhounds following a scent trail. How much did you transmit? Claudius asked, his voice revealing the first cracks in his composed facade. Everything, Hamlet replied with grim satisfaction. Harold's Swiss files, our surveillance recordings, financial records, witness testimony. Every crime, every payment, every murder you ordered. The entire network is exposed. The sound of additional helicopters filled the air as news crews began arriving at the estate's perimeter, their camera crews drawn by reports of a military operation in one of Virginia's most exclusive neighborhoods. Whatever control the conspiracy had maintained over the narrative was rapidly dissolving under the harsh light of public scrutiny. Sir, the lead operative said, his tone suggesting urgent tactical reassessment. We have multiple news helicopters establishing overwatch, congressional staff demanding access, and military police units requesting clarification of operational authority. This situation is rapidly exceeding containment parameters. Claudius stared at Hamlet with the focused hatred of a man watching his empire crumble in real time. The profits, the power, the carefully constructed network of corruption, all of it was dissolving because one grieving son had refused to accept his father's convenient death. You've destroyed everything, Claudius said, his mask of patriotic respectability finally slipping to reveal the predatory businessman beneath. No, Hamlet replied, his voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of a mission completed against overwhelming odds. I've restored everything. Honor, justice, and accountability for American blood spilled in pursuit of personal profit. The tactical situation was shifting as rapidly as Washington's political landscape. Through the communication center's damaged windows, Hamlet could see civilian vehicles arriving, congressional staffers, military investigators, and journalists whose presence would make simple execution impossible. The conspiracy had lost control of the narrative, and with it, their ability to eliminate inconvenient witnesses. The truth was loose in the world, and no amount of classified authority could contain it now. The estate's grand ballroom had been transformed into an impromptu command center, its crystal chandeliers casting harsh light on folding tables covered with classified documents, secure communication equipment, and the digital detritus of a conspiracy in terminal collapse. Congressional investigators worked alongside military prosecutors, their urgent conversations creating a cacophony of righteous indignation and bureaucratic damage control. Senator McCain himself had arrived within 2 hours of receiving Harold's evidence, his weathered face displaying the controlled fury of a war hero confronting betrayal within his own ranks. The senator's aide, a former Navy JAG officer named Laertes, coordinated the legal response with the precision of a military operation targeting high-value assets. We have enough evidence to convene a grand jury within 48 hours, Laertes reported, his voice carrying the crisp authority of a prosecutor who had handled military justice cases throughout his career. Financial crimes, conspiracy, murder for hire, violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and treason. The defendants will face either life imprisonment or execution. Hamlet sat in a wingback chair that had once hosted foreign ministers and defense contractors, now serving as an informal witness stand, where he provided testimony that would reshape American understanding of their government's secret wars. His uniform bore the dust and debris of the morning's assault, but his bearing remained that of an officer serving his country's highest ideals. Claudius occupied a matching chair across the room, surrounded by federal marshals who had arrived with congressional subpoenas bearing the seal of the Senate Armed Services Committee. His expensive suit appeared rumpled now, his silver hair disheveled by the collapse of carefully maintained appearances. The confident executive who had commanded billions in defense contracts now resembled a defendant awaiting sentencing. "The financial records are devastating," Senator McCain said, reviewing Harold's Swiss files with the analytical precision of a pilot studying enemy aircraft specifications. Ghost employees generating $50 million in fraudulent payroll. Weapons shipments diverted to black market networks. Insurance fraud involving fabricated casualty reports. This represents the systematic looting of American military appropriations. Admiral Richardson sat in federal custody at a separate table, his uniform stripped of ribbons and insignia that represented 30 years of honorable service corrupted by greed. The man who had coordinated Pentagon procurement for private military contractors now faced court-martial proceedings that would end with dishonorable discharge and federal imprisonment. Deputy Director Franklin had been arrested at CIA headquarters, his security clearances immediately revoked, and his access to classified facilities terminated. The intelligence professional who had facilitated arms trafficking through official channels now found himself classified as a national security risk requiring maximum security detention. The most serious charges involved the murder conspiracy, Laertes continued, his prosecutorial instincts evident in the way he organized evidence for maximum legal impact. "We have audio recordings of Claudius Elsinore ordering his brother's assassination, financial records showing payments to the operatives who conducted the killing, and witness testimony documenting the entire criminal enterprise." Gertrude entered the ballroom like a woman walking through the ruins of her own life. Her elegant attire couldn't conceal the emotional devastation of discovering that her husband's killer had shared her bed, that her grief had been manipulated by the very man who had created it. She moved to Hamlet's chair with the careful steps of someone navigating treacherous ground. "I never knew," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the investigative chaos surrounding them. "Harold's death destroyed me. When Claudius offered comfort, support, a way to preserve Harold's legacy, I thought I was honoring your father's memory." Hamlet took his mother's hand with the gentle care of a son who understood that victims could become unwilling accomplices without losing their essential innocence. "Dad's files show you weren't involved in the conspiracy. Claudius used your security clearances and your grief to legitimize his operations, but you had no knowledge of the criminal activities." "I should have known," Gertrude said, tears flowing freely for the first time since Harold's funeral. "A wife should recognize when she's sleeping beside her husband's murderer." Across the room, Claudius watched his family's destruction with the hollow expression of a man who had gambled everything on a single hand and lost catastrophically. The empire he had built through murder and corruption was dissolving under congressional scrutiny, his co-conspirators abandoning him with the ruthless efficiency of rats deserting a sinking vessel. "The Iraqi interpreter was fabricated," Claudius said suddenly, his voice carrying the defeated tone of a defendant offering final testimony. "There never was a witness to Harold's death. Hamlet created false intelligence to trap us into revealing our guilt." Senator McCain looked up from the classified documents with the sharp attention of an investigator recognizing a crucial admission. "Are you confessing to conspiracy in your brother's murder?" "I'm confessing to protecting American interests in a hostile theater of operations," Claudius replied. But his words lacked conviction. Harold threatened to expose legitimate intelligence activities. His death was regrettable but necessary to prevent greater damage to national security. "Regrettable but necessary," Hamlet repeated, his voice carrying the controlled anger of a son hearing his father's life dismissed as collateral damage. "Is that how you justify murder? How you sleep at night knowing you killed the man who raised you, trusted you, made you rich beyond imagination?" Claudius met his nephew's gaze with the hollow stare of a man who had long since abandoned moral considerations in pursuit of profit. Harold built this company to serve America. I made it profitable enough to survive. The difference between patriotism and treason is often simply a matter of perspective. The ballroom fell silent as investigators, prosecutors, and military officers absorbed the full implications of Claudius's confession. The conspiracy that had killed Harold Elsinore and corrupted American military operations stood exposed in all its venal brutality, its perpetrators facing justice for the first time since the war began. But Hamlet felt no satisfaction in his uncle's downfall, only the hollow completion of a duty that had cost him everything he had once believed about family, honor, and service. The mission was accomplished, but the victory tasted like ashes in his mouth. 6 months after the Elsinore estate raid, the Hart Senate Office Building's committee room, 216, resembled a modern amphitheater where American democracy conducted its most sacred ritual, holding power accountable to justice. C-SPAN cameras captured every word for posterity, while gallery seats overflowed with military families, defense contractors, and journalists whose coverage had transformed a family tragedy into a national reckoning with war profiteering. The witness table bore the weight of American betrayal made manifest. Claudius Elsinore sat in federal custody, his orange jumpsuit, a stark contrast to the expensive suits that had once commanded Pentagon briefings. Admiral Richardson flanked him, his military bearing diminished by shackles that clinked softly whenever he shifted position. Deputy Director Franklin completed the trio of conspirators, his intelligence community credentials reduced to evidence tags in a criminal prosecution. Senator McCain wielded his gavel with the authority of a war hero who had endured North Vietnamese torture rather than compromise American values. His opening statement crackled through the committee room sound system with the intensity of artillery fire. "We are here today because American soldiers died while their supposed protectors sold their equipment to the highest bidder. We are here because a conspiracy of Pentagon officials, CIA operatives, and private contractors turned the Iraq War into a personal profit center. We are here because greed corrupted the sacred trust between those who serve and those who send them to war." The committee room's marble walls seemed to absorb the weight of McCain's words, their classical architecture providing dignified witness to testimony that revealed the systematic corruption of America's military-industrial complex. Television lights illuminated faces that represented every level of the conspiracy, from Pentagon procurement officers to congressional staff members who had facilitated billions in fraudulent contracts. Hamlet occupied the primary witness chair, his army dress uniform bearing the ribbons earned through his investigation rather than combat deployment. His testimony had consumed 3 days of hearings, each revelation generating newspaper headlines and television coverage that penetrated America's consciousness like shrapnel from an exploding myth. "Lieutenant Elsinore," McCain continued, his voice carrying paternal respect for a soldier who had sacrificed everything to serve justice, "your investigation revealed that Elsinore Security generated over $200 million in fraudulent billings during fiscal year 2003. Can you explain how these false charges were processed through Pentagon accounting systems?" Hamlet activated the laser pointer that allowed him to reference classified documents displayed on multiple screens throughout the committee room. Each chart and graph represented American lives reduced to profit margins, soldiers' deaths converted into insurance claims that generated revenue for their killers. "Senator, the conspiracy required coordination between multiple agencies," Hamlet began, his voice carrying the crisp precision of a military briefing. "Pentagon procurement officers approved no-bid contracts without competitive bidding. CIA operatives provided intelligence that allowed weapons shipments to be diverted to black market networks. Congressional staff members ensured that oversight hearings focused on operational successes rather than financial irregularities." The gallery stirred as families of dead soldiers absorbed the implications of Hamlet's testimony. Their sons and daughters had died protecting convoys that carried weapons sold to insurgents, had served under commanders who viewed casualties as acceptable business costs, had believed in a mission that had been corrupted into a profitable lie. Ophelia sat in the witness section, her military intelligence background lending credibility to testimony that documented every aspect of the conspiracy. Her blonde hair was pulled back in regulation style, her blue eyes reflecting the harsh light of television cameras that broadcast American shame to a global audience. The fabricated personnel records were particularly sophisticated. Ophelia testified when called to the witness table. Ghost employees existed in every database: Social Security, Department of Defense, Veterans Administration. These fictional soldiers received full pay and benefits while real soldiers went without body armor, vehicle upgrades, and medical support. Claudius listened to his nephew's testimony with the hollow expression of a man watching his life's work transformed into evidence of criminal conspiracy. The defense contractors who had once sought his favor now avoided eye contact, their own legal teams preparing plea bargains that would minimize their clients' exposure to federal prosecution. Mr. Elsinore. McCain addressed Claudius directly, his tone carrying the controlled fury of a prosecutor cross-examining a war criminal. You ordered the murder of your own brother to protect financial interests worth approximately $50 million per quarter. Do you have anything to say to the families of soldiers who died because their equipment was sold to finance your lifestyle? Claudius rose slowly, his shackles restricting movement but not preventing him from facing his accusers with whatever dignity remained to a fratricidal traitor. The committee room fell silent as cameras focused on a man whose greed had corrupted everything Harold Elsinore had built to protect American personnel overseas. I regret the necessity of Harold's death, Claudius said, his voice carrying no trace of genuine remorse. But his investigation threatened operations that provided essential services to American personnel in hostile theaters. Sometimes protecting the mission requires difficult decisions about individual casualties. Individual casualties, McCain repeated, his voice rising with the indignation of a man who had seen too many young Americans return home in flag-draped coffins. Harold Elsinore was your brother, your business partner, the father of the young man who exposed your crimes. He wasn't a casualty, he was a murder victim. The television cameras captured Claudius's response with the unforgiving precision of digital documentation. His face revealed not grief for Harold's death but annoyance at being held accountable for a business decision that had gone wrong. The man who had once commanded respect from Pentagon generals now stood exposed as a common murderer whose only regret was getting caught. The committee will recess for 30 minutes, McCain announced, his gavel echoing through the chamber like a rifle shot. When we reconvene, we will hear final arguments before voting on criminal referrals to the Department of Justice. As the committee room emptied, Hamlet remained at the witness table, staring at classified documents that represented his father's legacy, transformed into instruments of justice. The investigation had cost him everything: his family, his military career, his faith in American institutions. But Harold's ghost could finally rest, knowing that his son had completed the mission. The war for truth was nearly over. Soon would come the reckoning. The committee room reconvened with the solemnity of a military tribunal, pronouncing judgment on war criminals. Senator McCain's weathered face bore the weight of 3 decades in the Senate, his experience with government scandal providing grim context for testimony that revealed corruption, exceeding even the worst examples from previous decades. The C-SPAN cameras continued their digital vigil, broadcasting American shame to a nation that had trusted its leaders to conduct righteous war. Colonel Polonius entered the witness section wearing civilian clothes, his military career ended by testimony that implicated him in the conspiracy's peripheral operations. His face displayed the hollow shock of a career officer discovering that his loyalty had been exploited by men who viewed military honor as a commodity to be bought and sold. Colonel Laertes, McCain addressed Polonius by his former rank, though stripped credentials made the title ceremonial rather than official. Your testimony indicates that you facilitated meetings between Pentagon procurement officers and private contractors without disclosing the financial relationships involved. Do you understand that these actions constitute violation of federal ethics regulations? Polonius stood with the mechanical precision of a soldier reporting for final duty, his 3 decades of service reduced to evidence in a criminal investigation. Senator, I believed I was facilitating legitimate business relationships that served American interests overseas. I had no knowledge of the fraudulent billing practices or the conspiracy to eliminate whistleblowers. But you did have knowledge of Harold Elsinore's concerns about operational irregularities, McCain pressed, his prosecutorial instincts evident in the way he structured questions for maximum legal impact. Lieutenant Elsinore's testimony indicates that his father approached you with evidence of ghost personnel and diverted weapons shipments. Why didn't you initiate formal investigations? The gallery leaned forward as Polonius faced the central question that had destroyed his career and contributed to Harold's death. His answer would determine whether he was viewed as an unwitting accomplice or a knowing participant in conspiracy that had cost American lives. Harold's allegations seemed inconsistent with my understanding of Elsinore Security's reputation, Polonius said, his voice carrying the defeated tone of a man who had chosen institutional loyalty over individual conscience. Claudius Elsinore commanded respect throughout the Pentagon. His contracts provided essential services that kept American personnel alive in hostile theaters. I assumed Harold's concerns reflected personal conflicts rather than systematic fraud. Personal conflicts, McCain repeated, his tone suggesting that such explanations were inadequate for the scope of betrayal documented in Harold's files. Colonel, we now know that these personal conflicts involved over $200 million in fraudulent billings, weapons sales to insurgent networks, and the premeditated murder of an American citizen. Do you still believe your institutional loyalty was appropriately placed? Polonius's shoulders sagged under the weight of recognition that his career had ended in disgrace, his reputation forever associated with a scandal that would be studied in military ethics courses for generations. The ribbons and decorations that had once adorned his chest now belonged to a man who no longer existed, their honor tarnished by association with systematic corruption. No, sir, Polonius admitted, his voice barely audible above the committee room's electronic humming. I failed in my duty to protect American personnel and American interests. My loyalty was misplaced, and my inaction contributed to crimes against the United States. The afternoon session brought testimony from CIA operatives who had provided intelligence support for Claudius's criminal enterprise. Deputy Director Franklin's former subordinates described a shadow organization within the agency that facilitated arms trafficking, drug smuggling, and currency manipulation schemes that generated billions in untraceable profits. The Iraqi theater provided perfect cover for black market operations, testified CIA analyst Maria Rodriguez. Her security clearances revoked but her conscience finally clear. Official weapons shipments disappeared into networks controlled by American operatives. Intelligence reports were fabricated to justify military actions that created profitable chaos. American soldiers died protecting convoys that carried weapons sold to their own enemies. The testimony painted a picture of American government institutions corrupted from within by men who viewed national service as a path to personal enrichment. Pentagon offices had become criminal enterprises, CIA stations had operated as money laundering facilities, and congressional oversight committees had been neutralized through carefully placed campaign contributions. As evening approached, McCain called for final statements from the primary defendants. Admiral Richardson rose first, his military bearing intact despite federal custody and the certain knowledge that his career would end in court-martial and imprisonment. Mr. Chairman, Richardson began, his voice carrying the formal precision of a military officer delivering his final report. I served this nation for 30 years in conflicts from the Cold War through Operation Iraqi Freedom. My actions in facilitating private contractor relationships were intended to provide American forces with capabilities that official channels couldn't deliver rapidly enough for combat requirements. Your actions resulted in American deaths and the systematic looting of military appropriations. McCain interrupted, his patience with self-serving explanations clearly exhausted. Do you accept responsibility for these consequences? Richardson stood silent for nearly a minute, his internal struggle visible as he weighed institutional loyalty against personal accountability. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of moral collapse made manifest. I accept responsibility for my role in operations that violated the trust placed in me by the American people and the soldiers I swore to protect, Richardson said. His military career ending not with honor but with admission of betrayal that would follow him to his grave. The committee room fell silent as the full scope of American institutional failure became clear. The men who had sworn oaths to protect and defend the Constitution had instead sold those principles for personal profit, their corruption costing lives that could never be recovered, and trust that would take generations to rebuild. Hamlet watched his uncle prepare for final testimony, knowing that no words could restore Harold's life or repair the damage done to American military honor. But justice demanded that Claudius face his crimes, with whatever dignity remained, to a fratricidal traitor whose greed had consumed everything sacred about family and service. The final reckoning was at hand. The committee room's atmosphere grew thick with anticipation as Claudius Elsinore rose for his final testimony. The television lights carved harsh shadows across his face, revealing the toll that 6 months of federal custody had taken on a man accustomed to commanding Pentagon briefings and billion-dollar defense contracts. His orange jumpsuit bore the stains of institutional food and the wrinkles of a life reduced to federal prisoner, number 47539-012. Senator McCain's voice cut through the silence with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. Claudius Elsinore, you stand accused of conspiracy to commit murder, systematic fraud against the United States government, arms trafficking, and treason. This committee has heard testimony documenting your role in the death of your brother Harold and the corruption of American military operations in Iraq. Do you have any final statement before we vote on criminal referrals? Claudius surveyed the committee room with eyes that held no remorse, only the calculating assessment of a businessman reviewing quarterly losses. The gallery filled with military families, defense contractors, and journalists represented the American public whose trust he had systematically betrayed for profit. His gaze finally settled on Hamlet, the nephew whose investigation had destroyed everything Claudius had built through violence and corruption. Mr. Chairman, Claudius began, his voice carrying the hollow precision of a man who had long since abandoned moral considerations. I built Elsinore Security into the most effective private military contractor in the Iraqi theater. Our operations protected American personnel, secured vital supply routes, and provided services that official military channels couldn't deliver with sufficient speed or flexibility. Your operations resulted in American deaths, McCain interrupted, his patience with self-serving explanations clearly exhausted. Ghost employees, diverted weapons, fabricated casualty reports. Your company existed primarily to defraud the American taxpayer, while soldiers died for lack of proper equipment. Soldiers die in war, Claudius replied with the emotional detachment that had characterized his entire criminal enterprise. My responsibility was to maximize operational efficiency and shareholder value. Harold threatened both objectives with his idealistic notions about military honor and transparent accounting practices. The committee room erupted in angry murmurs as military families absorbed the full implications of Claudius's worldview. To him, their sons and daughters were simply operational costs to be managed, their deaths acceptable casualties in pursuit of quarterly profit margins. The American flag behind McCain's chair seemed to flutter with indignation at such casual betrayal of everything it represented. Hamlet rose from the witness section, his dress uniform bearing the decorations earned through his investigation rather than combat deployment. The television cameras tracked his movement as he approached the committee table, his bearing reflecting the weight of duty completed at enormous personal cost. "Uncle," Hamlet said, his voice carrying the quiet intensity of a son addressing his father's killer. "Harold Elsinore built this company to protect American lives. You perverted that mission into a machine that consumed American blood for profit. Do you feel any remorse for what you've done?" Claudius met his nephew's gaze with the flat stare of a predator calculating whether its prey still posed a threat. 6 months of testimony had revealed the complete scope of his moral bankruptcy, but Hamlet still hoped to find some trace of the man who had once been Harold's beloved brother. "Remorse is a luxury for people who can afford to ignore economic realities," Claudius replied, his words echoing through the committee room like gunshots in a cathedral. "Harold built this company, but he lacked the vision to make it profitable enough to survive in a competitive marketplace. I did what was necessary to protect our family's legacy." "You murdered our family's legacy the moment you ordered Dad's death," Hamlet said, his composure cracking to reveal the grief that had driven his 18-month investigation. "Harold Elsinore died believing in honor, duty, and service to something greater than personal profit. You killed those ideals along with the man who embodied them." The committee room fell silent as uncle and nephew faced each other across the ruins of a family empire built on American values and destroyed by American greed. Claudius represented everything that had gone wrong with America's post-9/11 military expansion, the transformation of national defense into a profitable business model that measured success in quarterly earnings rather than lives protected. "The committee will now vote on criminal referrals," McCain announced, his gavel echoing through the chamber with the finality of justice delivered. All those in favor of referring Claudius Elsinore, Admiral Richardson, and Deputy Director Franklin to the Department of Justice for prosecution on charges of conspiracy, fraud, arms trafficking, and treason? The unanimous vote carried the weight of American democracy, holding its most powerful institutions accountable. The television cameras captured each senator's raised hand as a historical record that some betrayals would not be tolerated, some corruption would not be ignored, some truths would not be buried beneath classified stamps and national security exemptions. As federal marshals led Claudius away in shackles, he paused beside Hamlet with the satisfied expression of a man who had achieved his primary objective despite tactical defeat. "You've destroyed everything Harold built," he whispered, his voice carrying venomous satisfaction. "Elsinore Security is finished, our family name is ruined, and your mother will live in poverty because of your righteous crusade." "I've restored everything Harold built," Hamlet replied, his voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of duty completed despite overwhelming personal cost. Honor, integrity, accountability for American blood spilled in pursuit of justice rather than profit. The committee room began to empty as journalists rushed to file stories that would dominate newspaper headlines and television coverage for weeks. Congressional investigators gathered classified documents that would fuel additional hearings. Military prosecutors prepared cases that would send dozens of conspirators to federal prison, and families of dead soldiers finally understood why their loved ones had died. Hamlet remained at the witness table as the chamber emptied, staring at photographs of Harold that had served as evidence exhibits throughout the hearings. His father's steady gaze seemed to offer final approval for a mission that had cost everything but preserved the values that made such sacrifice meaningful. Ophelia approached with the careful steps of someone walking through the wreckage of a shared life. Her intelligence career was over, her security clearances revoked, her future uncertain in a Washington that would remember her as the officer who had helped expose American institutional corruption. "Is it finished?" she asked, settling beside Hamlet among the debris of classified documents and constitutional democracy barely preserved. "It's finished," Hamlet confirmed, though his voice carried no satisfaction. "The guilty will face justice, the corruption will be exposed, and Harold's death will finally have meaning. But the cost." He gestured at the empty committee room, where American ideals had been weighed against American greed and found wanting. "The cost was worth paying," Ophelia said, her hand finding his among the scattered papers that documented both national shame and personal redemption. "Some truths are worth any sacrifice." Outside the Hart Building's windows, Washington's monument stood silent witness to another chapter in America's continuing struggle between its highest aspirations and its deepest failures. The Lincoln Memorial's marble columns reflected television lights from news crews broadcasting the day's testimony, while the Washington Monument pierced the evening sky like a stone prayer for guidance in times of moral crisis. Hamlet Elsinore had completed his mission, avenged his father's death, and restored honor to a family name corrupted by greed. But victory tasted like ashes in his mouth, seasoned with the bitter knowledge that American institutions were only as strong as the men and women who served them with integrity intact. The Prince's War was over. The reckoning had begun.